in it using this dialog. And here you have the atmosphere dialog, and in here you can add volume lights. You can see volume light here, which will give you the effect of light shining through a fog, which is an atmospheric effect you see in quite a lot of CG. It's quite useful in certain circumstances. There's also standard fog, which is a depth queuing effect, which is also a standard CG effect. So there you are. There are the atmospherics and the other environmental elements. Then you have effects, and these are post-render effects generally. You can see here you've got things like lens effects, which will do lens flares, blurs, brightening and contrast changes, color balance, motion blur, and so forth. You have advanced lighting here, and for instance you have the light tracer. This is used when you're doing GI rendering, and you can see this has been this is actually part of the normal render dialog, so you can see it's one of the tabs of it. And in advanced lighting you can see you've got different advanced lighting techniques. This is the light tracer and is used by GI. It'll basically sample light bouncing around your scene, and it'll give you nicer lighting effects, greater fidelity to real world lighting. And we'll actually come across this in the tutorial, which we'll do in the second part of this DVD, so we'll leave that for now. Then we have render to texture, which is used by game artists predominantly. What this allows you to do is, for instance, light a scene using GI, and then you can actually do a render of that scene, and it will actually render out each object, and it'll actually bake the lighting into a texture, and that can be used in a game engine to give you very nice, very high quality lighting effects. Then you have the ray tracer settings. If you're using ray tracing in your scene here, you can address the ray tracer settings, and you can set up maximum depth of bounces of rays, and all the other elements which will optimize a ray tracing render. And again, you can see this is another tab in the render dialog. And you've got ray trace global exclude include, again, which is an optimization feature of ray tracing. Basically allows you to say, if you have an object in your scene which is incredibly dense polygon wise and doesn't really render in ray trace reflections, you can exclude that from the ray tracing, and that will actually speed up your ray trace rendering a lot. Below that you have the mental ray message window, which only really becomes relevant when using mental ray. When you do have mental ray as your active renderer and you're using it, any messages from mental ray will be posted into this window, and you can check out various diagnostic elements of your scene in here. You have the active shade floater. This is used with active shade, which is basically a real-time rendering system with 3D Studio Max. Real shade, active shade I should say, picks up any changes that you make to materials in your scene or lights, and then it will actually just render that element of the image. It can be used to tweak your textures and see how they react to lighting in a pretty much a real-time manner. So that's quite useful. So you've got active shade floater here and the active shade viewport. And the material editor, which can also be brought up by pressing this button here. Actually, for the rendering dialog, you can use this button here. So if I press this, there's a material editor, and this brings up the render dialog. So we'll go back to this menu and get it from here. Bring up the material editor. This is something that you'll use in quite a lot of scenes. Obviously, you're going to be making textures, and you'll use this render dialog. But I think we'll actually come across this in another part of this tutorial, so we'll deal with that with this dialog then. You have the material map browser, and this allows you to look for materials in a material library. There's an example of material library. There you go. You can see all these various bitmap textures and pre-designed textures here. You can look for materials in the scene on the selected object, create a new material. And this dialog is actually usually brought up by the material editor. When you're in the material editor, you say, right then, let's make a new material, and you click on here, and this brings up the material map browser. So here we go. We can create a new material. Let's say we'll create a blend material. I know this is a blend material, and we can edit that. So this is basically a repository for all your basic shaders and bitmaps and so forth. Then we have Video Post, and this is a legacy system which was brought across from 3D Studio. It's basically a simple compositing system. You can render out one camera, render out another camera, or you could, you can render out 10 cameras all in the same scene, and Video Post will take care of that for you. Or as an example, you can bring in some files and then you can composite them together using alpha channels and so forth. These days, though, it's been pretty much superseded by your dedicated compositing systems, for instance, combustion or shake. So not used that much these days, but still there for scenes when you actually need it. As I said, the multi-camera render feature of it is actually very good. It allows you to, if you have 28 cameras in one scene, to actually, while you're doing a simple render, you can actually skip between those cameras and just render those all out in one go, and set that up with a very simple script here. So it is actually quite useful for doing that still. Show last rendering. This is only active when you actually have a render. So if we do a render, there we go, we've done a render of a teapot. We close this window down. We can't see our render viewport anymore, so you can go here and you can say show last rendering, and it shows you last render. Below that we have 3 tools. We have the panorama exporter, which is used for producing panoramic views, for instance, for use in QuickTime. Below that you have the print size wizard. This is for setting up DPI settings for rendering out to print. So you can bring that up here, and you can actually work out various elements of what you're going to do with the print, what the DPI should be for a certain size of image, how big the image should be for a certain DPI, and so forth. So a quite useful little tool there. And below that we have the RAM player, which is something again we'll come to later in the tutorial scene. So we'll skip that for now. To the right of the rendering menu we have the customize menu, and here obviously you can set up lots of different options for working in 3D Studio Max. At the top of the customize menu we have the customize user interface. This is something which is worth going into quite quickly here. In Max you can customize the keyboard, you can customize the toolbars, you can customize the quad menus. This is a quad menu here. You can customize menus, and you can also customize the colors which are used in the user interface. So as an example, let's go to keyboard. I'm going to customize a keyboard element here, and I'm going to customize hide. So I'll click on here and I'll press H, and it takes us down to H. I'll scroll down until I can see the different hide options. And what I want to actually do is put a keyboard shortcut on hide selected object. So there's hide selection. I click in here, and I do. I'm going to use Control H. So there you go. You can see it's got Control H. It tells you what it's assigned to at the moment, which is place highlight. Hiding your selection is probably used a lot more than placing highlights. So in this case, I don't mind losing that particular shortcut. I'll assign that, and you can see here it now says hide selection Control H, and you can then save that to one of your UI setups. So in this case, we'll just save it to Max Start. Actually, we'll save it to a new GUI setup, and we'll call this one Chris's. I'll call it Chris GUI. There we go, Chris GUI. Just save that. Let's create a toolbar. I'm going to create a toolbar called Chris Toolbar. So over here we'll go new toolbar. We'll call that Chris. Oops, Chris Toolbar. Okay, it's created the toolbar here, and I'm just going to move that over to the left hand side of the screen, and we'll just dock it there. There we go. You can see it's actually quite small at the moment, but basically we can drag commands onto that later, and I'll do that when I show you how the MaxScript editor works, so we can show how those two things link up. You can do the same thing for quads. I could create a new command here, get any of these commands and put it into a quad. You can modify any of the existing quads, so you have a lot of options there. Same thing for menus. You can modify the menus. Okay, so as you can see, there's lots of options for customizing Max, for changing keyboard shortcuts, changing the menus, changing the way the quads work, or adding commands to them, and the toolbars. So there's a lot of flexibility there. When you've created a custom UI scheme, you can load it, you can save it, which is something I just did from within inside the custom user interface dialog, or you can revert to a startup layout.